Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Yoga Well podcast. I'm your host, Chase Bossart. Today I have Esther Bogatova with me. She is a very serious student of yoga philosophy, yoga practice. You completed our yoga therapist program, and you've done a lot of studies through the Yoga Well Institute. But the thing that is most interesting to me, Esther, is that your website is called sweeterfoodyoga.com. And I want to know, how did you come up with that name?
Hi, Chase. It's my pleasure to be here. So, good question. Sweeter food yoga. In yoga philosophy, we speak about gunas. These are the qualities that pervade our material world. And they are sattva, which is light and sweet. It's rajas, which is fast and can be furious, right? And tamas, which is slow and full of inertia. So the more you practice yoga, the more you're connected to that sattvic quality of light and sweetness. So my dive into that name that I came up with was about ability to allow people to be connected to some sweetness that is ever present within them, that nourishes them, that feeds them, and that is not especially can be easily bought in the supermarket. So that was my reasoning behind it.
I love it. It's so good. As you're speaking, it's reminding me of the Yoga Well Institute, right? So we are the well of yoga. And what is a well? A well is technology that allows you to access resources which are at depth, at least under the surface, and for which you would not otherwise be able to access. So here we have this idea that within us is something so precious and so powerful, and which we can move towards and develop a relationship with through yoga. So
Chase, when
nice.
I just met you, I heard the name of your institute, Yoga Well. I thought it was something along the line, you do yoga, you feel well. But then when I started working with you and studying with you, I realized that it's not exactly about the wellness, but about this depth. And once you start diving in, you never end, for sure, going
Yes.
deeper and deeper.
Yeah, I was recounting on a recent conversation how Mr. Deshikachar studied the Yoga Sutras with his father 7 separate times. He went through the whole sutra, 4 different chapters, one by one, 7 different times. And how, the first time he did that, he was just a young man and he was not interested in spirituality, and he thought his father's religiosity was ridiculous and being kind. And he said to his father, okay, we'll study the Yoga Sutra, but I don't want to talk about God. I don't want to know. So when they got to chapter 1, number 23, where it says īśvarapraṇidhāna va, Krishnamacharya said, well, this is about God. It doesn't apply to you, so we skip it. So he skipped over those 7 sutras that were from 23 to 29, and it went on to number 30, etc. Then, the second time that he was studying the Yoga Sutras with his father, he got to the same section, and Krishnamacharya said, well, we'll skip over. He said, no, Father. since people are studying with me, I ought to know what it's saying. I should hear that. And of course, I started studying with him only after his father had passed. So he had completed all his the studies with his father, and now it was just it was growing and developing in him. But he was by far the most spiritual, the most in touch with spirit person that I have ever recognized, that I have ever been in interactions with. And I come from a very religious family, and my mother in particular is quite concerned about my dalliance in Eastern philosophies. But to me, it was always that he was the most spiritual, the most authentically religious person that I have ever known, even though he had so few religious trappings. He didn't wear any of the markings on his forehead, or any of the, at least in most of his interactions with the public or with me, he didn't wear religious clothing and stuff. And yet there was something that was in him and that came through him that was so touching and so deep. Yeah. Very interesting.
And I would say it's not only about studying, but really the practice and the experience that allows you to get in touch with it. It's not that he went over the sutra 7 times, right? But time passed and he practiced and he went deep into himself, eventually uncovering something that allowed him to deep understand what was it that was standing behind
Yeah,
those
and to
sutras in the first
express
chapter, for sure.
and to be it. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the things that has interested me in your path in yoga is you have a deep interest in spirituality, and you have come to also at the same time as study yoga. You're also studying and practicing Kabbalah. And I want to hear that story and how you discovered those things and the direction they went, etc. But I'd like to start with the beginning, like what was the first time you practiced yoga, or how did you come to find yoga, etc.
Huh. All right. So 1998, I was working in a small company in the center of Moscow. And then in the building next to our building was this studio in the basement of the building, tiny, tiny studio. And it was not particularly Ashtanga, but it was Ashtanga inspired sequences that we did there. And was my first introduction to yoga. The studio smelled like a lot of tapas because like when you entered it, this density of people's work that was done there was really palpable. But there was no music. The official length of the class was hour 45 minutes. But when our teacher was in the flow, sometimes we could practice for 2 hours and 30 minutes, sometimes 3 hours. So there was some pranayama at the end. There was a very long shavasana, like 20 minutes or something. And although it was largely physical experience, at the same time, that was an experience that really got you deep into yourself. So I practiced there for several years. And then I started working more. Eventually, I stopped practicing yoga. And then fast forward to 2010, I think. When I moved to the United States, I lived for several years in Boston. And so when I just moved to Boston, I wanted to find something where I could, somewhere where I could practice yoga. First, I went to local YMCA, not knowing what was YMCA about. Ended up in a class with a lot of windows, with loud music, and people in fancy pants practicing yoga. And it was quite a existential experience, just because it was totally not along the lines that I was used to. And the other thing I want to mention, when I practiced that other version of yoga, I really read a lot. There was this book written by Georg Fernstein, the Encyclopedia of Yoga, that talked about yoga philosophy, had translations of Upanishads in it. So I really knew quite a bit about yoga itself. So when I encountered this interpretation of yoga at YMCA, it wasn't not exactly along the lines how I understood it. So eventually I found that wonderful place in the Back Bay in Boston. It was called Back Bay Studio. And that was quite an authentic place. And I practiced there for several years. And then eventually my family moved to Austin, Texas. And after I had my second kid, I got in touch with yoga again as a mean, first of all, just to get out of the house and to have some time to myself. So I did a lot of yoga nidra and yin yoga. And, through all these years, although it was more or less authentic experience, both at Back Bay and here at Yoga, it's almost like I forgot what was that yoga from my 90s experience about. It's like one thing was substituted by the other, and it was all right. It got me deep into myself, but it was not as deep as it could be and as I once experienced. So until I came across your presentation of yoga when you were invited to our 200-hour teacher training, and you gave us some experience. You talked about yoga sutras, and then the light bulb came up for me, and like, oh, right, that's the yoga that I once knew, and this is the yoga I want to be connected again to. And this is how my deeper dive into yoga practice and study of the philosophy was resumed.
Right. Very interesting. How did you decide to then? So we had the next sort of long training that I was going to do was in Nashville, Tennessee, and it was yoga therapist training. It was 4 years long, and you sort of jumped in with both feet with a kind of a minimal experience of my teaching. How did you decide to do that?
I think it was the taste of yoga that I felt through your teaching, like in the second chapter, right? In the second sutra, it talks about bhavanam, like when we practice, right? We get this taste of real connection. And so I think that tasting that sweetness of the practice again, right, allowed me to crave for more. And honestly, I was not really looking towards becoming a yoga therapist, right? It was my personal journey. I just wanted to study more. And since that was the only thing that you were offering at this depth and at this length, so I just jumped into that train with you. And also I remember when we once talked here at the yoga studio, and I asked you so that I remember the exact question I asked you. So I want that magic again. So I was looking for magic. I was not looking for like becoming a yoga therapist or yoga teacher. I wanted to be reconnected to magic and find that magic for myself again. Because, what is magic, right? Magic is something beyond the capacity of our mind, our conditioning. Everything that is outside is magic just because our mind is not programmed that way. So I just wanted to rip open that for myself and to learn more about my own experiences and to study deeper.
My recollection of that conversation, it's been quite a number of years now, is that you had also had some sort of energetic opening and that you are
That's
trying to make sense of that. And
that's
is
true. So around that time, something happened to me, and then that was that experience that I had in my spine that I could not really understand and comprehend in the like frame of mind that I was in, but also I do not have people around me with whom I could discuss it and tell and like hear someone else's interpretation. So I just dealt it with myself, by myself. But also, given the phase of life I was in, my kids were small. I just didn't have much time to pay attention to it. So and I think this is something that happens actually, it's not like an extraordinary experience, right? It happens to people, but people, they think that it's strange and just don't talk about it, feel reluctant to discuss it because it's on like on this weird spectrum. But for me, I think it's almost was like a trigger for the um, events to unfold later in my life. But also, it's one of those events that can be really life changing in the sense that it really like forces you to ask those existential questions: who you are, what is your identity. And it almost like gives some fluidity kick to your identity, so that understanding that you're not actually exactly that you thought you were. And it becomes much easier to deal with that. But also it requires some supportive environment, right? Because otherwise it's quite
yeah.
strange.
Well, so much of what yoga is interested in is identity. It's interested in this foundation of what is the foundation from which perception and understanding are occurring. And to have an experience in your own body and your own mind that shakes what you thought you were or who you thought you were to its core is it's a very powerful experience. And then you're absolutely right. I mean, and you're so understated by saying, and then you have to ask some questions. Who are you, and what are you doing, and why are you doing it, and what does it mean to be alive, and all of these things like that. So you went to do the so you went to this 4-year long yoga therapy training, looking for magic, etc. Was it there?
Of course, it still is. Once you got connected, there is something that you can come back
So
again and again, right?
what was the main takeaway for you in the yoga therapist training?
You know, like you always told us, the primary focus of your yoga therapy training is to have your own personal practice. And this is it. So the whole yoga therapy training, although now I have pleasure of working with people and mentoring them and be a yoga therapist for people, but at the same time, the whole journey, the whole 3.5 years long journey was totally um, me-centered endeavor, right? It was about me, discovering me, going deeper into me, because sharing yoga further, being a yoga therapist or yoga teacher or mentor, how can you even do it if you're not really in touch with yourself, right? So it's something that is nourished by your connectedness, or at least sincere attempt to connect with your inner self, and that allows you to rest in some authentic place from which you connect with other people, because otherwise it's like one mask meeting the other mask. There is no value in that. And but the whole process is about uncovering those masks, right?
So nicely said. So nicely said. Yeah. I really believe that to be a authentic yoga teacher or to be an authentic yoga therapist, etc., we have to go through the process ourselves. Oh, and that process doesn't end. It's not like you do it for 18 months and then, okay, I've done my time. It's like, no, it's an ongoing thing. And it's so important to have the experience of someone guiding you and of someone taking a real interest and a real care in what you're doing and how it's functioning. And then seeing how your practice changes and how you develop, and it brings you into something within yourself that is what is actually shared with the whoever is coming to see you. Very, very lovely. Thank you for that. So good. So you're also deeply involved in Kabbalah. Tell me, how did you find that? And I'm very interested in the overlap between Kabbalah and yoga.
I think every spiritual search starts with a bunch of sufferings that we experience. So if we are well,
yeah,
we don't look, right? And only if it's really painful to be where we are, we start questioning stuff and start looking for answers. So I think that was my place back in 2002, maybe 2001. And so I stumbled upon, like in a bookstore in Moscow, I stumbled upon the book called The Power of Kabbalah, published by Kabbalah Center. And so I bought the book, and the genius of that book, it wraps up the 1,000 years deep understanding of how the metaphysics of world works into very simple 10 lessons. So I read through that. I was really interested. And just a side note, it's exactly the same. I think overall there is a phenomena in our world that is tangible and visible to people, and people in different cultures and countries try through the centuries and millennia to interpret it, and they came up with some understanding how it all works. But eventually it's all about the same thing. So anyway, I read the book. There was a number at the end of the book. I called the number. I politely asked whether it was cult or not. The person on the other side of the line assured me that it was not a cult. And then so I came, and it was just, in religious settings, we are asked to follow certain things, right? It's just you're brought to, I don't know, church or synagogue or a temple, whatever it is, from early age, and you just repeat what others are doing after that, and then you make your kids repeat the same, etc., etc. So this is religiosity, right? It's just blind following without questioning and asking why it is and how it is came to be. Whereas here in that book, for the first time in my life, someone explained me why all those things that I observe around myself actually work this way. And that was what was so compelling. So nobody forced me to do anything or follow something. It was just my pure interest that guided me to learn more, just because it was so straightforward, so simple, and so genius to the way the teaching explained the phenomena in our world. And then I studied quite deeply for 5 years or so. And then there was this point, because Kabbalah, what is Kabbalah? It's the Jewish mysticism. So I came to this understanding that probably it was time for me to convert to Judaism. And eventually I decided not to, and then forced myself, just ripped myself out of this context. Although, again, it was just my inner search and journey. And then years later, around when COVID started, actually, I came across the guy with whom I was in that study group on the Facebook, and he talked, so there was this video he talked about. Anyway, I reconnected to Kabbalah Center again. And since then, this is something that is so authentically mine. And it's not about whether I'm Jewish or not. It's not about like blindly following something, but every Friday when Shabbat comes, it's like my soul is nourished. I'm so happy to connect to that space. And something is downloaded through the means of those tools. And if you are open and able to receive it and connect to that, something for sure is changing in you, and you are connected to something bigger than that, than yourself.
Yeah. It's so nice. You know, when you're talking about what really was interesting about Kabbalah in the beginning, I was just thinking about my first experience with Mr. Deshikachar is that I was on a study abroad program in India. And as you were saying, I was suffering. And I mean, not that being in India was suffering, but I was a lot of suffering in my world before going to India. And here came this philosophy class, yoga theory, in which this very delightful and positive and light, short little man was explaining to me, here's how things work, and this is why you're suffering. It was like, oh God. And it wasn't just that. It was also, we had these twice weekly classes at his Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram, where we did physical exercises and breathing movements, and then we had homework to do it at home in our hotel room in between classes, and it was just like, oh, this is interesting, because, like you're saying, it's an inquiry-based exploration. It's not trying to say, here's, you have to believe this and you have to believe that, and if you do that, then at the end of the day, you'll be saved, or such and such a thing will happen, or whatever. It's saying, well, what do you think of this? And why don't you explore that? And the more that happens, the more you find resonance with your own personal history, and with the way that the more you find things happening that are echoed in the explanations that are given, and it's like, I can see. And then, like, the philosophy, it starts to mean something different because it's anchored in actual events. And then it's not some idea, it's actually a mechanism that you can see happening and that you can experience, and then you can actually work with. And it's embodied philosophy points at what is happening there, but it and the more you do it, the deeper you go, the more you see, like, oh, there's this multi-thousand-year long conversation where people are talking about their experiences, and the language they use starts to mean something, and you're like, it means that. Oh my God. Oh. And it's so exciting, and it's so interesting, and it's also it's so deep. It's so interesting.
If I may, I just want to connect these two tracks that we just discussed. The yoga journey as an experiential journey to go deep into ourselves, and then spiritual practice that is added almost on top of it for some people, right? Some people, they just do their yoga practice, and this is how they go deeper. In my case, I have something else on top of it, but not really on top of it. And this is something that I want to discuss, is that like I observe some people around me and they do their spiritual practice, right? But they are not really present in their bodies. There is so much stuff that is still going on in them that is that has residue in their bodies, in their psyche, and you can do spiritual practice on top of that, but it's not that effective. And the brilliance of yoga is that through the practice, through doing your personal practice every single day, you almost like you cleanse yourself again and again, purifying this bodily vessel that you are in, breathing through and out all the like impurities, energetic impurities that you carry and that were residing in you for decades, right? And then when you are really present, it's so much easier to connect to something higher. And then when spirituality and like extra practice may come in and be really effective. And for example, with Mr. Desikachar, right, like you said, so it took him 7 years and 7 cycles, like to go it and around again and again, right? When that was uncovered and that shined like with more and more clarity every single cycle he went through. And then, so what I think is that combining two practices, this is so powerful. And essentially, like I said, all the things are eventually about the same, coming to the same center, to the same essence. Question is, how do you get there and what are the tools that you're using? And since we're so like we're all the same, but at the same time we're different. Our souls came to this world with different flavors and with different purposes. And it's not like one thing is right, the other thing is wrong. It's just we all have our own paths, and whatever works for your soul, it's just your path. And then the art of it and the gift of yoga is that it allows you to discover and to feel what is it that path, a path that is authentically yours and what you need to follow.
So nicely put. You know, this is definitely the model of Krishnamacharya, who had his own deeply spiritual religious path. He was a Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, which the Sri Vaishnava lineage. And he was deeply involved in religious praxis around Narayana. And at the same time, his yoga was very supportive of that, and a nourishing element or a perhaps foundational piece of that practice. And if we look at what yoga philosophy is really saying, there's a deep spirituality there, such that it's the practice of yoga has the capability, the power really to change the way that we are experiencing the world from just a set of perhaps random or somewhat related ongoing occurrences to something that is an orchestrated dance. It's not that material events are random, or it's not that they just happen and if you're in a body on a planet and then you die and then that's it. It's that events happen as part of an orchestration, and you then respond, and that response can either be dancing with it or fighting against it. If we are able to dance with it, it turns whatever is happening, positive or negative, into a piece of the relationship with something that is much greater than the events and it provides this really meaningful and deep structure that holds the events of our lives. And it's so interesting. And
So true.
when
So
you look at yoga, it's basically saying the fundamental exercise or the fundamental interest of yoga is perception. And what does yoga do? It changes your perception. To what degree? To even the degree that your experience of life is completely reworked.
this, it's just so true that you just shared. And this reminds me of my own explorations for this past few years about the duality of relationships within me and the concept of self-love. So in yoga, we have this concept of some yoga, right? When we just start our journey, we think that we are the container, and this is some yoga, the junction of the spirit and materiality, whereas person thinks that materiality is all there is, right? And then so through the process of our practice, we discover that there are our emotions, there are our experiences, our thoughts, but then actually there is something else that is ever present in the background, right? Watching all this that is happening. And so when you experientially really feel it, you understand that there is something that is within you. And then this is where this very tender part for me comes in, right? It's almost like it's trusted you that you in this life will be its partner. You in this life will like go with this essence within you, like hand in hand, helping this essence to act through you according to this plan that was ever existent before you physically was born, right? And when you really feel this relationship within yourself, it's just here where what I think this actual self-love comes and is born. It's like, it's not that I'm loving me the way I look in the mirror, right? Or for all my diplomas or whatever it was, right? I love my very essence within me with so much tenderness and reverence. And my very highly valued and honored responsibility is just to hear what this essence within me has to say and to follow it with this very loving trust and reverence. Yeah.
So nicely put. It's so true. It's so true. So let me follow up that beautiful comment, Esther, by asking you, what is the role of studies and the understanding of the philosophy and all of that? And you have taken now quite a number of classes with the Yoga Well Institute. You have been really gone deep in the philosophy, etc. So what
You know,
in that
one of the
in that big ball that I'm throwing you, what's there for you?
one of the people that I know, he says this with his very heavy Israeli accent. It's all about connection. And this is exactly what it is. It's like when, for example, on Thursday night, when I come, and I've been coming there for this past year and a half to study Hatha Yoga Pradipika with you. Before that, it was chapter 4 of Yoga Sutra for another year and a half. And then before that, it was chapter 3 of Yoga Sutras for another year and a half. So basically, every Thursday night, we open up this container for a group of people to come together, people who have the shared interest, shared background of the things that they studied, and to connect So yes, we go shloka by shloka or sutra by sutra. We discuss everything and the depth of what philosophy has to offer. But at the same time, I think the primary value of that is that we're almost like collectively plugging in to something bigger than we are. And we are open enough and humble enough just to download something that maybe even not like on the conscious level, but we are connecting to some wisdom that is present for us when we come together to study. And of course, it's just such a great fun to be in the group of like-minded people and to go shloka by shloka, sutra by sutra, have fun together, like stumble upon something that is really hard to understand or something that is so groundbreaking and we never thought about it before. It's so very special what we are doing. And then when I remember when I just started and I jumped, you started back then this Yoga Sutra Chapter 3 study, and I jumped maybe on the train, maybe like 2 or 3 months later. I was so intimidated because back then I perceived myself a total imposter and intruder, not knowing anything. And there, those people who've been studying sutras for decades. And here I am, intimidated to open my mouth and to ask a very simple question just because I thought that the question was so stupid. But then people are so supportive, and there are no stupid questions, because like when you ask a very simple thing, like a very deep thing can be uncovered. And it's a great blessing that we have this container for us to go over the same stuff again and again, because as where we started our conversation today, right? 7 times Mr. Desikachar went over sutras, right? But it's not only that he was coming to the same content, he was different when he was coming to the same content. So even like in the 20th time, we discuss like the essence of the exhale in yoga practice. We are different at that moment where we're discussing it again at the 20th time. And then it's a different, totally different answer and understanding that we come up with. So
It's so true. It's so true. I love those. I love those Thursday classes. They're so enriching. And, they're just ongoing. And it's just, you join whenever, because there's not really a beginning, right? It's just, well, we're going to start talking about yoga philosophy, and we're in this particular section of this particular text, but what we're talking about is yoga. And in order to understand this particular section of this particular text, we actually have to go back a little bit. So here's the arc of this text, and here's what this text is trying to do, et cetera, et cetera. And then we come back down, and then we come back down again. And now here's this idea. I think one of the things that Mr. Deshikachar used to do in all of his classes is that he would review. So I've been talking about and his group classes, but he also did it in his individual classes. But in his group classes, he would review. Like he had an ongoing Saturday morning lecture that was like a little bit less than an hour. And he would spend the first 20 minutes, 25 minutes of it talking about what he'd already talked about. And yet it was never boring. It was always reorganized so that a different idea was emphasized on that day, and you could see how it threaded through. And now here we are today, and this is what we're talking about, etc. And I think, that's such a nice way to have classes, because you can join at any time. You don't have to join at any beginning, because there's always a review, and there's always contextualization, and there's always the bigger piece of seeing, like, this is what it's all about. Okay, and now here. To have that within a group of people who are willing to be reflective. And like you said, there are no dumb questions. People ask very straightforward, very simple questions. And very often we get really deep core discussions drawn out of that because it just triggers something that should be that quote should be obvious, but which is not. And it's so lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. And Chase, I should also applaud your willingness to go with us down the rabbit hole, right? Because we want, for example, our intention to cover this shloka tonight, right? But then we spent next to classes going deeper into something else. And this is so valuable that those questions come up and then we spend time to really go deeper into it.
Again, this is what Mr. Deshikachar modeled. Like, what comes up is the most important thing. What's coming up is not accidental. What is being discussed, what is being questioned, what comes up for me in terms of my response, these things are not accidental. And if we're really going to take yoga as the study of something deep and authentic within ourselves, then we should respect like what's happening and be with it. And who knows where that will lead? But many times it's so rewarding and so interesting to the places that it does go. Thank you for mentioning that, because it is really a value, I believe, of Vini Yoga, that it's open and it's interested and curious, and that takes you to unexpected places. Yeah.
And like you said, right, it's yoga, and yoga is atha, now, and what is present now. It's not my intention from 10 minutes ago to talk about this particular topic, right? There is something else that came up and that is present. Yeah. And the other thing, speaking about these classes, it's not that, like, thinking that, for example, Hatha Yoga Pradipika is so far out and it doesn't really apply to me. This year and a half with you studying the text, I learned so much about my own practice, although I do not live in a small hut covered with a cow dung from inside, right? The way a true yogi need to live where the book starts, right? And then out of those 15 postures listed in the first chapter, I barely can do, I don't know, 1 or 2, right? Because my body doesn't work that way. So on the surface, not much is attainable, but at the same time, through this connection that we are building, through the things that we discuss, really my personal practice and my teaching was so greatly enriched. Just really transformational experience.
Thank you.
Not to mention that I have now much clearer understanding how Hatha Yoga relate to the yoga discussed in Yoga Sutras, and what are the benefits and the processes and how they all align to each other. It's just so deep and transformative, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. What Mr. Deshikachar passed on from his father is so broad and so deep that it's really takes a long time to kind of even understand the outlines of it. And for myself, having been now a serious student since 1991, so more than 30 years, I'm continually discovering more and realizing that what I know is so little. It's so little. And in fact, it's like when we go through these texts, and with each text we go through, it's like a whole nother universe is like, again, unpeeled and all this. But I've already been through this text how many times? And that whole nother universe comes and it applies to all these other universes that we've discussed. And it's very interesting. I mean, something I say a lot and that I really mean is that one of Mr. Deshikachar's greatest gifts is lifelong learning. And as we were saying earlier, not just some book learning, really learning that's like experiential and in relationships and showing up again and again, like on my mat and in what my neighbor says and how we interact and what I decide to do, my daughter or my career or my, it's just, it's phenomenal what we've been given. Really, it's so rich. It's so rich.
I would say it's lifelong unlearning and uncovering and dismantling the understanding that was there before, right? That's where the magic comes in, right? The magic is showing things from a different perspective that was not attainable before. And you can cleanse it forever, for sure.
Super. Esther, what a pleasure to talk with you today. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. People can find you at sweeterfoodyoga.com. And you are teaching some philosophy courses as well as mentoring people one-on-one. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Chase, for having me today. It was great fun and honor to be here today.
This is great fun. This is super fun. Thank you.
Thank you.